I'm Erin Anderson. I'm the Agriculture and Environmental Field Technician at the MD of Ranchland. We work with landowners to try to come up with plans when they have concerns, both for invasive species management and for conservation of rangeland and riparian areas.
I'm Megan Evans. I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Invasive Species Council. In my spare time, I also run the Alberta Native Bee Council. So an invasive species is an organism that originates somewhere else and that's found itself in a new environment where it causes harm. So invasive species come in all different forms. We've got weeds, we've got aquatic invasive fish, we've got invasive pigs, invasive diseases, invasive fungi. The most single effective way to manage invasive species is to prevent them from establishing in the first place. But the second best way, taking an early detection and rapid response approach. Once seeds are at a location, they can remain in the seed bank for, in some cases, 100 years.
The real broad definition of a weed is just any plant you don't want there. So we're mostly talking about the noxious and prohibited noxious weeds. For example, downy brome can come in and take over a grassland, and it's a big fire risk. It matures really early, really dry, can be extremely damaging.
So if you have weeds in your forage field, they can enter the baled hay, and then someone buys your forage and they take it to their property, and then those weeds can then germinate. I guess the Certified Weed-Free Forage Program is intended to prevent the spread of invasive species through contaminated forage.
We don't have a ton of forage production in ranchland, but we do have lots of buyers, lots of ranchers. Their livelihood is that land. A lot of them do dedicate time and effort into taking good care of it. Here at the MD of Ranchland, we have a native seed harvesting program, and then we can take that seed and we can sell it to people who are renaturalizing. More local is better because it's used to that climate, it's used to that environment.
Also, if there are any contaminants in there, you're not going to be introducing a brand new species to the area. When we manage invasive species, we do want to take an integrated pest management approach. That includes biocontrol, chemical control, hand pulling, you name it. Biocontrol is the use of living things to control pest species. Say we're dealing with a weed species, they determine where the weed species is native, and then they go and they research. They look for insect species or something else that is a specialist. So for example, leafy spurge. So researchers figured out where leafy spurge was native. They found flea beetles that only fed and reproduced on leafy spurge. And once researchers are confident that they do have, in fact, a specialist species, they're allowed to start releasing it into the wild.
When I think of biocontrol, it's basically living species controlling an invasive species.
In invasive species management, our failures are everywhere and our successes are invisible. What we do see is the oxeye daisy and the Canada thistle that are kind of everywhere, right? If you're out hiking in a higher elevation area and you're looking at a pine tree that has needles in clusters of 5, that's either a whitebark or a limber pine. The leading cause of the mortality of those tree species is this invasive fungus, white pine blister rust. But the Whitebark Pine Ecosystem Foundation is doing really good work to identify healthy trees in stands of infected trees and then produce seedlings with those resistant trees.
Introduced species are more of a nuisance than they are really invasive. They don't necessarily take over an environment. Lots of people love their stocked lakes. You have to acknowledge that it does impact native trout. They can outcompete for habitat or for food. They can hybridize with the native species.
Like the rainbow trout that are put in now are manipulated so that they can't breed. That's why Whistle Cutthroat trout, they check the DNA because they were breeding with rainbow trout.
The MD of Ranchland is focused on helping and protecting native trout. So things like whirling disease can be a really big risk. West Slope cutthroat trout are particularly vulnerable. So at-risk species definitely can be displaced and affected by invasive species.
Our introduction of wild boar into Canada, 80s and 90s, on purpose in an effort to diversify agriculture. There wasn't a huge uptake, so producers kind of lost interest. A lot of them escaped, and in other cases, producers just cut the fence. They're considered to be one of the most damaging invasive species on the planet. They turn over crops and grassland areas. They'll get into riparian areas and wallow around in the mud and also contaminate water bodies. Biggest issue with these animals is the threat of disease transmission. So we really do need to get a handle on that. I think there's a few things that everyone can do. One is just to be aware that we have these invasive species, understanding that you can report them using EDMAP, which is the early detection and distribution mapping system.
Use the programs, use the information that's out there. If you find an invasive species, take a picture of it, take some coordinates if you can. We do all of this because we care a lot about these ecosystems. All of this, the whole reason is it's for the land.